Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I'd like to announce some people that are here today. Deborah Strickland, of course, is here. John Verdon, our Nye County Treasurer, is here. Sure appreciate him being here. Al Green, our Nye County Republican Chairman, is here. Kay here, Kay LaPointe. There she is, Vice Chair. Donna Cox, did she make it?
No.
John Coney.
No.
Robin Hebron. There she is with Front Valley Times. Deanna O'Donnell is here, so I saw her, didn't I? Did I see her? With the TV, or with KBUMB. Daryl Lacey's here. Where did I see him? There he is. Dwight Lilly, where's Dwight? There he is. How could I miss that? Great, thank you all for coming. Yucca Mountain is of interest to me, and I think it's probably of interest to you since you're from Nye County, and Yucca Mountain is in Nye County. The purpose of this forum is to kind of bring everybody up to date with what's going on with Yucca Mountain. So I'm sure probably most of you know a lot of the history about Yucca Mountain and kind of why it came to be, but just refresh a little bit. In the 60s and 70s was the beginning of the nuclear reactors as an energy source for America. And a byproduct of the nuclear reactors is nuclear waste. And we realized that in the 80s that we needed to have a place to put this waste. And so that's where Yucca Mountain was kind of formed back in the Reagan administration after 1980. And Yucca Mountain was hatched, and they actually started building it and got it pretty well built. And then politics happened, and we didn't finish it, or aren't completely finished with it. So, and therefore the nuclear industry kind of stalled at that point. And the reason was we didn't have a way to deal with the waste, and we have problems with that. I don't know whether you know this, but we are paying, as taxpayers, $2.2 million a year fine because the waste is not in Yucca Mountain. And the way that happened was when we entered an agreement with all of these states that have nuclear reactors, they were expected for us to take their waste. And instead, it's sitting at 121 sites around the country, just sitting above ground, not as safe as it should be. Of course, we haven't had any accidents, and you haven't heard of any problems with it sitting there, but Yucca Mountain's a safer place for it. So the states sued the Department of Energy because we didn't take their waste, and the fine, I think it's $2.2 million a day we're paying. So that's a problem. A day. Isn't that right, Steve? Is that right?
That's correct.
Per day.
$2.2 million per day.
$2.2 million per day we pay fine.
Who gets the money?
The states. I think it's the states, is that right? And on behalf of...
No, it's coming out of the federal budget. The federal budget's paying it. It's
federal
not coming out of the
budget.
fund.
Basically, the federal budget's paying it. Yeah.
But who's receiving the money?
The states, or I don't know, does it actually go down to the actual Yucca nuclear reactor owners?
It goes to the utilities that own nuclear reactors.
The utilities.
Based on how much spent fuel they're storing.
Right, right. Could be. Is that $1 billion, 600 million, something like that?
That's about $750 million a year, but it's going to soon get up to $1 billion as they add more and more waste.
Yeah, they're
spent fuel
they're adding more and more to it. Right. So that's a huge problem. The original cost of Yucca Mountain was estimated to be $200 billion. Did you know that? That's a lot of money. That's the original cost. And so we have a solution to bring that way down to something that's reasonable. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Kind of how this started was about 5 years ago. Myself and some of the guys you see here met a gentleman in Las Vegas. His name is Colonel Bob Frank. He recently passed away, unfortunately, but he was kind of the father of this. And he said, you know, we've got a lot of problems, let's solve them. So 5 years ago, of course, was during the Obama administration, and Harry Reid was the Senate leader, and they kind of didn't want anything to do with Yucca Mountain, so they just pretty much shut it down and we couldn't do anything. But once President Trump was elected, he signaled right away that he was going to reopen the licensing process of Yucca Mountain. And I think their intentions, they didn't know anything about an alternative that we had formulated, and they were just going to open it up and it was going to be a permanent dump forever. And me personally, and I think a lot of us here, do not want Nevada to be a permanent dump for America's nuclear waste, right? So first of all, we don't want to store it permanently, and it's very valuable material. It's only about 5% used, 3 to 5% used, so it's wasting a lot of material that we could use in the future. So we proposed to Congressman Amodei that why don't we negotiate for something for Nevada. So it turns out that when President Trump and Secretary Perry signaled that they were going to reopen the licensing process, like I said, they wanted to do it the old way. And we needed to get to them and let them know that there's an alternative. And we wanted to negotiate for something for Nevadans, because if we just store it, we don't really get anything. So we went to Congressman Amodei and said, okay, why don't we negotiate for a recycling facility here and a world-class Livermore-type lab that will research and develop all of the above carbon-free energy, wind, solar, bio, hydrogen, whatever future brings us, right, for energy, baseload energy generation systems, including the new small modular reactors, which we're going to talk about a little later. So basically, there's 49 states against 1. So we're going to probably lose this battle. When they had the vote on H.R. 3053, which was the original bill to reopen the licensing process as Yucca Mountain was originally planned, it was 340, this is in the House, 340 to 72. So that tells you it's a lot of Democrats want that also. So like I said, I went to Congressman Amodei and I said, look, if we're going to lose this battle, let's negotiate something good for Nevada and let's solve some problems. So what we did is he said, great, come to Washington, help me mark up this H.R. 3053 bill. Let's add an amendment in there to start this process where we could explore a recycling facility, a Livermore-type lab, and let's see if we can get it through the bills. And that actually passed out of committee unanimously and passed through the House and is currently sitting on the Senate side. And I went to Washington a couple of weeks ago to find out kind of where we're at there. And there are a few amendments to it that the Senate is going to try to get through, but pretty much the staffers for the Senate side sat with me, I explained, and they knew what we were doing. They knew our proposal, and they were all for it. So right now, it's sitting on the Senate side, and we've got some momentum to get this done. So hopefully, we can do something really good for Nevada. There's billions and billions of dollars worth of revenue if we're able to do this for Nevadans, to the point where hopefully we could do something for every citizen in Nevada like Alaska does with their oil, right? You get a rebate, you could get we're not sure exactly how to structure it, but you could get a rebate on your energy bill, we could, a tax credit or something like that. I don't really, I'm fighting to just give the money to the state because, the state, they'll waste it. I want to make sure it gets to you. So I see a lot of heads nodding there. And that's one of the things that I did make sure with the staffers in Washington that we want to structure this so that it doesn't get 100% controlled by the state. But we want the citizens of Nevada to get the benefit of it, and we're going to figure that out. So anyway, so this is our alternative. Now, to build a recycling facility, we're estimating it's going to cost about $25 billion, not $200 billion, so we're way less. In addition to that, to build a Livermore type lab that we could put out at Mercury or somewhere around there, another 15 billion, something like that. So currently, there's money in a fund that has been accumulating since we started Yucca Mountain, and supposedly it's up to 40 million. It may be some 30 to 40 billion dollars. I'm sorry, billion dollars. And that's the money we want to leverage. And I talked to the staffers on the Senate side, and they agreed with that. They said, yeah, we could probably leverage that fund that's there and use it to build the facilities once we get to that point. So that's the goal. So I wanted to kind of get into some of the pros and cons of doing this in Nevada, because there's a lot of people are worried about earthquakes since we just had one. We have some water issues, and this is kind of why these guys are here. They're experts, and they can answer a lot of questions about things like that, kind of how the original Yucca Mountain was designed, and why it is a safe place. It's probably the safest place on earth to do this, or in the United States, and kind of why we do that. So the cons are, of course, you have a radiation issue, and one of the positive things about recycling is we use it up to where there's virtually very little left that we do need to store. And so we have the water issue. There's a lot of issues around storing the material permanently in Yucca Mountain and having an issue and having it leak into the water and that type of thing. I think we can prevent that from happening by doing some sort of recycling facility, because the byproduct that you end up with after you've recycled it totally is basically some ceramic wafers that are not as radioactive as what they want to store here. So earthquakes, we probably want to talk about that, and I'm going to defer to these guys here in a minute. Then we have transportation issues. That's a lot of the drawbacks that we want to try to overcome. The positives are we solve a lot of problems. We solve the $2.2 million a day fine. We solve the issue that is hindering our nuclear generation system industry from growing, because we don't have a way to deal with the waste at this point. Then we've got the huge economic development opportunity for Nevada. Thousands and thousands of jobs and millions of dollars worth of high-paying jobs will come to Nevada. You'll have this entire industry come to Nevada, and that's good tax revenue. I'd love to stop raising your taxes. I don't know, I won't do it. I know I won't do it, but some people will. But the other thing that can be positive out of this is by doing this, we can grow the small modular reactor industry, and we can actually use these devices to power desalination plants to get us more water over here somehow. Either we pump water out of the Pacific and we give it to LA, and we keep our water from the Colorado. There's a lot of ways we can address that problem. And that's something, this at least gives us the opportunity to do that. So I want to kind of throw it to some of the guys here that can kind of talk about, first of all, maybe Craig, you could take this. Yucca Mountain, a lot of the problems that people are saying is that the radiation problem. Can you kind of give it, well, first of all, let me do this. I want to let each one of these guys introduce themselves so you'll know they're world-renowned nuclear scientists. So first, go ahead, Craig, and kind of tell people your background.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yes, my name is Craig Smith. I received a PhD many decades ago from UCLA in nuclear science and engineering. I currently serve as a professor in the physics department at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, but my work there involves supervising research of graduate students. So I cut a deal that allows me to live here in Nevada. I live actually in Washoe County, and work out of my home most of the time, except when I need to be on campus. And so, and let me offer one other caveat to my comments here. These are my own comments, and I'm not intended to be representative of my employer or the federal government.
Right.
So I live in the Reno area. I've been working actively with Jim and Colonel Bob and my other colleagues on this idea, fundamentally to try to come up with a positive path forward, a solution to the problem, rather than where we've been for a long time, having two different sides, everybody screaming at each other, nobody listening. So that's sort of where I come from. Now, the question that Jim posed was, what about the issue of the levels of radioactivity? And we all know that with spent nuclear fuel in Yucca Mountain, there are requirements for performance verification that go out 10,000 years, 25,000 years, 250,000 years, or a million years. Sort of take your pick. At different times, people claim different requirements. These requirements are generally driven by certain constituents of spent nuclear fuel that have a very long half-life. And under this recycling idea, the components of spent nuclear fuel would be separated out. And those constituents that drive the very long time frames of concern would not be considered waste. They would be considered fuel for advanced reactors that are currently under development. So the residual material, instead of it being items that have 25,000 year half-life, for example, which is one of the primary ones, or even longer, we're talking about materials that have like a 30-year half-life, much more manageable, much more treatable, and able to be contained in, for example, these ceramic materials.
Right, that's good. Perfect. Also, Steve, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, he stated that very concisely.
Great. We've got Steve Curtis. Why don't you tell everybody your background, Steve?
Okay, I was working for DOE for about 15 years on the emergency response teams for radiological. Then I became sort of a consultant after that. And right now I'm not really employed by anybody, which gives me the opportunity to say what I mean. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years in a big way. I have put on seminars in Nevada, and that's kind of what I'm doing now. But the basic bottom line that really gets me going is if we ask for these benefits, we'll get them. If any state, and if you recycle this, any state can recycle it. So if any state decides to ask for these benefits, they will get them also. So we want to make sure Nevada gets put into the queue for this. And it's not just individual benefits, it's the economic benefits that Jim was talking about. So we're going to ask for a carbon-free energy national laboratory. We're going to ask for microgrid research. We're going to ask for small modular reactor research. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, as Craig said, to have designer fuels for these different types of reactors that are coming up. And I'm sure they're going to talk about those later, but they're very exciting. And you may not know it, but the nuclear industry has the safest record as far as industrial safety of any organization in the United States, and the small modular reactors are even safer than that. So I'll leave it at that, and I'd be glad to answer questions from anybody.
Yep, okay. Let's address since we just had an earthquake here, let's address some of the earthquake issues at Yucca Mountain, and will we have them with our new alternative as we're planning? I guess, Ron, would you like to take that one first?
We're going, there we go. Takes it a moment to come out. You know, I got to direct a couple of tests out at the test site, and every time one of those devices...
Tell them your
went off-
background first.
I'm Ron Frost, Air Force pilot, C-130 guy, Air Force, and you guys paid for me to go back for my master's degree in nuclear engineering and weapons effects. So my specialty is things that go boom. And we do a pretty good job here in the U.S. maintaining those. We did most of the testing of those to make sure they would actually function, not with their full release, but partial release out at the Nevada test site. The last few years before I retired 3 years ago, I was with the Environmental Protection Agency. I was the director of the National Center for Radiation Field Response. So had there been a radiological incident anywhere in the U.S. and potentially worldwide, my staff from Las Vegas would have been out there working that. Prior to that, with the EPA, I ran the RadNet system. You may recall during Fukushima, if you wanted to, you could go online and look at the radiation levels in about 100 cities across the United States from Fukushima. The real answer to that was, could the radiation be detected in the United States? Yes. If I had a sample that was collecting air for about a week, and then I brought it to my laboratory in Montgomery, Alabama, and I counted it for a day and a half, I could just barely detect radiation from Fukushima. The RadNet system, which is an automated one, which gave you a data point every hour, detected it once for about 2 hours, a single isotope in Hawaii. So basically, the RadNet system, we were about a factor of 100,000 or a million below any level that you would have needed to worry about as a citizen. Once we got out to the lab, we could see it even lower. So as far as the earthquake thing, I did barely feel the one. We live on the west side of Vegas, the last two that we had in Vegas recently. Every time we detonated a device out there at the test site, there were tremors. Now, they weren't geological tremors, they were tremors from the device going off, and we could feel them. So we did a lot of the tests out there, and we didn't affect anything from the earthquake issue. The other one, oh, well, it's going to crack some things, get down the water. The water table out there is called a perched water table. The water table that exists does not connect to other water tables in the area. So we're not going to see an issue with that. Every test that was conducted out there, either above or below ground, the tunnel shots like my test was, we monitored the air, we monitored the water, we had people going all around looking. Some of the earlier detonations that put plumes up in the air, yeah, those were much more detectable. But we're not doing that anymore. So am I worried about an earthquake affecting either a depository or a recycling facility? No. I'm not a geologist, I'm a nuclear engineer. And again, as I said, my specialty is weapon effects. But I'm not concerned about earthquakes. I'd be more concerned about being in one of the tall buildings downtown. And we're doing a pretty good job with building construction. California's done a better job because they have more of them. But if you look at some of those pictures with all the stuff falling on the floor, you walk through something like Walmart or Kmart that has a variety of hazardous chemicals on their shelves. If those suddenly fall on the floor and start breaking, I would worry about that if I was in the store.
Go ahead, Craig.
Let me add just one quick comment to what Ron said, because he brought up Fukushima and its impact of radiation release. The earthquake at Fukushima was one of the largest ones that we've experienced in centuries. It was larger than the design basis earthquake for the reactors in that region. But all of the reactors survived the earthquake just fine. They shut themselves down. There was, we think of this as an earthquake-induced accident. The reality is, it was the tsunami that followed that created the problem. And so, while we may understand the engineering of being earthquake-proof, and I think we do, maybe we should worry about a tsunami. I don't think we're going to have
No,
that
you-
problem out here.
Tell us, give us your bio, and you can kind of comment on that too.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. My name is Anthony Hechinova. I'm a professor at Abu Dhabi Polytechnic. It is a vocational university in the Middle East. Why am I here and why am I there? Well, I guess I'll give you a little bit more of my background. I have a PhD in nuclear engineering from MIT. And before I went to Abu Dhabi, which I've been there now since 2010, so I've been there for 9 years. For 15 years, I was at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The last 10 years, I was head of nuclear research. For 10 years, I was also on the Pahrump advisory board. It was at the time Mary Wilson was the person from the town board. And I believe that was the Nuclear Waste and Environmental Advisory Board. So I would come out from Las Vegas once a month for 10 years. So I do have a fondness of Pahrump. And I used to also bowl twice a week while I was in Las Vegas. And my bowling buddies retired to Pahrump. So last night I had dinner with them at the winery restaurant. So I have a number of reasons to make sure I come back to Pahrump and to see Brother John, my old friends. I do feel like I've come home. I've been living in Abu Dhabi. I do like it in Abu Dhabi. I was headhunted there to build a education and training center for the operators of the Baraka nuclear power plant. I don't know if any of you know it, but there are 4 nuclear reactors. Unit number 1 is 100% complete. The only reason it's not operating, they do not have the domestic trained and qualified operators. To date, I've graduated over 200 of them who are working on getting their qualifications. That's why people often wonder, why did I go to Abu Dhabi? I'm American, obviously. Why did I go there? Because that was where they were building nuclear power plants. And I studied this for my career as a student at the University of California and at MIT. And we weren't building them. All my classmates were working for TRW and the Yucca Mountain Project. All my classmates were either going to work, or were working on the Yucca Mountain Project, working on the Yucca Mountain Project. I assumed I'd be working on the Yucca Mountain Project. It didn't turn out that way. I ended up working at UNLV on the thing next door, the Nevada test site. We're looking at radiation migration from weapons testing. And during my time at UNLV, we were looking at, well, what are some of the solutions? Because we knew that, and I truly believe that the Nevada community, the Nevada public, did not want a nuclear waste dump.
Right.
And I was the associate executive director at the Harry Reid Center. So my figurehead didn't want that done. And I would meet with him and staffers and learn all the politics behind it. But when we started to look at what are things that could resolve this, where we didn't have to have it done, we started to look at not really reprocessing, we wanted to call it recycling.
Right.
It was now taking the material and realizing this is very, very valuable. It should never have been put with the word dump. And as an administrator at UNLV, I would have a series of seminars, and the seminar speaker was Sandoval, who was the Attorney General at the time, the governor. I also had Burton Richter. Burt Richter, he's a Nobel laureate, and he's had several of the Department of Energy panels. And he gave an address at UNLV, and he said, if you build Yucca Mountain the way that they're talking about building Yucca Mountain, you're not building a dump, you're building a mine. Because it may not be in the next tens of years, maybe not even the next 100 years, but there is so much energy in the uranium and plutonium that you're putting in that done,
Exactly.
that people in the future will the theme, the title of that conference is Nuclear Power Saves the World.
Exactly. We have that opportunity here, and Nevada can be the center of the universe for that, and that's what we're trying to make sure that we can do that here, and it's going to benefit every Nevadan in Nevada, and that's our goal. So one of the things that he touched on a little bit is the environmental groups. Typically, they are against nuclear power and the reprocessing and things like that, anything to do with nuclear. And recently, a lot of them have done a 180. There's a gentleman out of California named Michael Schellenberger that was a radical anti-nuclear guy back in the day, and he has done a 180, and he's now one of the biggest proponents of what we're talking about, and something we're going to talk about in a few minutes, a small modular reactor. It's the new advanced reactors that are walk-away safe. In other words, you can walk away from them and they won't melt down because they don't have that type of fuel in them. So they have done a 180, like I said, and they now are on our side, and they're saying the same thing that Anthony just said, that if you really want to do something about climate change, this is our only solution. And since we're there, I'll segue into something that recently happened with Creech Air Force Base. Our group here, Bob Frank, who we talked about, and a couple, I think Marty here, is with the National Defense Industry Association, actually met with Colonel Tippett, the base commander at Creech Air Force Base, and he told them about a problem he had. They lose power about 10 times a year. And as you know, Creech Air Force Base is a mission-critical military base for us. When they lose power, it's not good. They fly every Air Force drone in the world from Creech, from these little games. I mean, it's like a video game. And these little pods they sit in, they fly drones in Afghanistan. And when they lose power, it's not good. So, if they lose connection with one of those, and believe me, when I was out there and did a tour, they showed us one video. They were about to take something out, and they lost power. And those guys, they actually got to our guys. We were trying to take them out so they could not fire on our guys, but they were able to because we lost power. So that's a serious problem. So we told him about the new advanced reactors that are available now, and he loved it. He said, this is absolutely what we need. We need a base load energy system. He looked into solar, he looked into wind. And of course, the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow because you can't rely on it 100%. But with a small modular reactor, you can. So he loved it. And he actually took the bull by the horns, and he actually drove this through the Department of Defense to the point where right now we have a request for solution out to manufacturers all over the country to develop a small modular reactor that he can install out at Creech, or we have another idea to put it up at Mercury so it can power Mercury and Creech because they're tied together. And so that's amazing. So we actually are trying to get one of these installed out there by 2024. Can you imagine that? 2024. And the reason we can do that is because the Department of Defense and DOE, they don't have to go through the NRC to get this done because they do whatever they want. When I first started this process, I knew we had to do it politically. So we'd have to get all the everybody political on board, and you know how that is. I was thinking it'd be 20 years before we could get this done, but since we've got a willing partner in the Department of Defense and they can push this, it's going to be a lot faster now. So the ability for us to draw industry here and make Nevada the center of the universe for energy, like he said, we have a valuable resource here. And why shouldn't we take advantage of it for us? And that's kind of what we want to do here. So Since we were talking about the small modular reactors, I want to bring Marty up here. We've got a little presentation that'll kind of take you through what we've been talking to with the Department of Defense and kind of the issues of Yucca Mountain. We'll show you a picture of where this stuff is currently stored. Like I said, it's 121 sites around the country, and it's costing us $2.2 million a day to keep it there. So there's a lot of problems that we can get solved. So I'll turn it over to Marty for just a second here, and I'll let him tell you about his background and kind of how he got involved with this and why he's doing it. So Marty Wallman.
Hello. I'm the only one here who's an engineering background, but not in this stuff. So I come from missile and rocket background and was working things with Nellis and Creech, the National Defense Industrial Association. And then during a meeting up there on September 7th of last year, this concept surfaced when at the time the colonel in charge of all the missions at Creech recognized what Colonel Bob Frank, who was with us, who just passed away, mentioned about this capability. He was very interested in that. So we had a great mission ahead of us that we're working through till today to bring this capability to Creech Air Force Base, and in turn it'll multiply out to the military. The military wants it in many locations. Also the Army heard that we were doing this, and the Army's been trying to make this happen. They're hitting their heads kind of on a glass ceiling. So now they're our partner with this, and the time is now to make this happen. Army would like to be able to fly in a small reactor, roll it out of the airplane along with a, it's called a microgrid that we'll get into, and hook it up, as I'm oversimplifying, but plug and play with the reactor, and you have a self-contained power generation system that saves many lives, because typically the biggest thing in any conflict where we go into another area is driving in all those diesel generators and fuel trucks. And the fuel trucks are the greatest target for the people that want to have the military, our military have a bad day in that area, because that's the big thing. It explodes big if you hit it, and there's been a lot of people killed and a lot of fuel trucks destroyed and fuel destroyed, and they couldn't carry on the mission because they didn't have power there. So this totally changes the paradigm of war for us to make a strong presence to maybe avoid war in a lot of cases. So lets us go into a lot of areas robustly, very simply. One airplane flies it in, you're done, instead of all that ground logistics and cost and risk of lives. So this presentation is about that big picture of kind of everything. When you finish up here today, you'll know exactly what's going on with this from a big picture perspective. And it all starts here. So, okay, just a little thing. So we've had 30 years of history of Yucca Mountain kind of having a bad name and being a big political thing that people, both sides have been it's been like the Civil War. And so the whole point of this is to discuss, the name of the place is still Yucca Mountain, but we're saying on the bottom, considering a new viewpoint. So keep that in mind, new viewpoint on Yucca Mountain. You've all probably heard of Yucca Mountain for years, but always like, what the hell is going on with that thing? So now this is, you won't have to ask that anymore. It's our intention. So along the lines of a new viewpoint, instead of all the typical things you think about Yucca Mountain, it's like the History Channel on this chart. For instance, Yucca, in the construction perspective, they built Yucca Mountain, they finished it about 12 million years ago. So that's kind of an interesting little fact for you. It's not just Yucca Mountain that you always heard of. It's like they built it and they finished this thing 12 million years ago. For us to come along in the 20th century and have a 30-year delay on. And then also where it's located, probably most of you know this, but it's about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. And up on top, it's the three aspects of it. There's the mountain, there's the nuclear power concept that's been fused into the discussion, and then there's the politics. And that last little box there, the politics, has been the tough point that's kept this thing from happening for about a third of a lifetime for everyone involved in this. And so we're really happy that it never became a dump. We're also calling it a cemetery, a nuclear cemetery. So whatever word you want, new viewpoint. And as was mentioned before, if it had become a dump or cemetery, would be missing out on the most lucrative and leading 21st century opportunity in the world. I always hear new things, so I forget who said it, but it was like we were building a gold mine. I think, did you say it? So it's like, I never thought of that. It's like, yeah, we're building a gold mine for the future in the 25th century or something, who knows. But anyway, we have the opportunity to make it our gold mine in the 21st century, and we don't have to mine the stuff out of it. Because, hopefully it's the next chart. Yep, because all that gold, is sitting above ground at all these sites that have nuclear reactors. Now, you've always heard how it's so dangerous to put this all in the mountain, right? But yet it's safe enough to keep behind a chain link fence. In many cases where you can drive by and walk by where it's being stored. So kind of think about that. But anyway, we're not here to discuss how that doesn't make sense to think how it's more dangerous in the mountain. We're here to talk about how we're glad it wasn't, because that would have been a huge waste, at least for our lifetime, maybe for the future miners to mine out that mountain of all this stored energy, which is actually the way it's configured. You can only use like what percent of that? It's like 5-10%. Yeah, so it's like 90% remaining. It's like a flashlight. Like you just use 5% of the batteries, then you throw them away, put them in your backyard mountain or something. Okay, so the big picture here, so in the upper left is another view of Yucca. It's Yucca Mountain now. We're going to have some good luck with it. Is what would have been the cemetery now becomes temporary storage from all that stuff that's just safe enough behind the chain link fence. And this is a view of, I don't know where this is, it might be in France or somewhere, but that's kind of what a spent fuel recycling center looks like. It's a big industrial area that gets built where they do all the magic stuff to recycle and get it ready to use again. And then approximate about 3% that's really dangerous and not usable. Now instead of having to figure out a way to shield that for like 1 million years so it won't kill the people here 1 million years from now, is kind of just below the plus sign there. It says safe residue ceramic storage. So they have this way to encapsulate, again, I come from missiles and rockets, but there's a way to encapsulate it so it's in ceramic, all safe, and this is like in a big room and there's someone walking on the floor out there, so that's very safe instead of something that's dangerous for 1 million years. Bottom left, the next plus sign, these are notional drawings of different small modular reactors. And then equals, the equal sign, is the whole concept that we're driving at here today is the small modular reactor concept. And you can see, is there a laser pointer in there? No? I'll just wait. We have a bigger one next. So there's like a reactor, there's a person standing next to it. You see this one. For instance, probably, I don't know, making this up, but maybe about half this volume or maybe all this volume, we powered the whole city for 25 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of the density of power in these things. And then those nice little kind of, what's that? Oh, okay, I forgot what I said. So the middle, a little point.
There's a portable mic there.
We are emailing. Is it on? We were emailing, and he's like all the way on the other side of the world, and it's like, I walk in and didn't know what he looked like, and then he introduced himself. It's interesting how a modern world works. So anyway, so here's some unknown person who doesn't exist, standing next to a small modular reactor that doesn't exist. However, that's what a person would look like, and that's what a small reactor would look like. And so the concept, like I mentioned, you can have one some kind of size of this room powering your whole city here. So that power distribution system that would plug and play with that reactor is called a microgrid. So picture, this depiction here is like a city, and its own power is contained in each of these grids. The next picture is bigger. I might not be able to reach it. I can't. But anyway, so you can see how everything is self-contained. So this is answering the big, most important thing of everything. Who's ever heard the question, what happens if the grid goes down? Okay, with this concept, there is no more the grid. There's tens of thousands, like President Eisenhower and whatever his people wanted. You have tens of thousands of these reactors around the country, each locally powering its own defined area. Like here in Pahrump, you would have your own. Or maybe you'd have two if you want to split the city in half. Whatever you want to do. On the Strip, you would probably have one for each huge casino. So it just depends. So here's the key thing. The tons and tons of spent nuclear fuel in the USA can be recycled to about 97% of its original energy and then loaded into tens of thousands of small reactors, capital letters, manufactured in Nevada that will individually power microgrids all around the country. So here's the big thing. No more dependence on the vulnerable national grid. No more question what happens when the grid goes down. Well, there's many reasons why the grid could go down. There could be a solar flare, and about 6 months ago, there was one, and we were lucky we were on the other side of the sun, because if we had been where that ejector went out, it would have hit the earth, and this microphone wouldn't be working now, and we'd all be doing something else, because our way of life would be totally disrupted. Big thing that we probably don't realize is our devices and everything we depend upon, even our cars are computer controlled now. Gas stations, electricity powers that pump. Your water, electricity powers the pumps to pull the water out to your house. What you plug in the walls, everything, our whole way of life depends upon electricity. So picture no electricity. We're not very well trained to live the way they did in the 1800s. So either those old industries of the Iceman comes back and delivers ice to your little ice box or whatever the case is, or we're all going to have some problems. So this is the big thing. Our dependence has far exceeded the ability to have robust, secure power supplied to us. And there's other things. If it's a war situation, electromagnetic pulse, like over in Kansas, would wipe out this one big grid in about 3 major sections. So that could take out the whole thing. Cyber is probably the biggest threat, because probably as we speak, there's little viruses and worms in the software control thing that just waiting, someone can push a button on and activate. So there's big vulnerabilities here. There's been strange things that have happened at very convenient times when the grid has gone down in some places. So there's many ways for the grid to be interrupted. And then honest ways when the grid has been interrupted by big storms or whatever, you've seen the situation that comes from that. So This is a key thing. And by going to this new paradigm, that gets eliminated. 99.9999%. So it all starts here in Nevada. So they don't like to talk about it. They mean what's going on in politics now, whatever, but Nevada's journey to reclaim its nuclear heritage. You think of San Diego, what do you think of? The Navy. You think of like Dayton, you think of the Wright brothers and the Air Force there. What do you think of when you think of Nevada, if you're not a tourist? The nuclear heritage. So this is an opportunity to reclaim our nuclear heritage and supply the nation with assured energy. This number widely varies, but probably 200 on the low side, but maybe 2,000 on the upper side. In any event, probably for as long as the country's been here. And did you all see Back to the Future? You know, Mr. Fusion? So that obviously would become the next thing, but until we get to that point, this microgrid and small reactor thing is a huge leap beyond the vulnerabilities that we depend on right now for power. So right here, that statement. Remember that statement. So the journey has begun. So there's always been a need to figure out how do you begin this journey. It's great ideas, this, that, whatever, but as Jim and the others mentioned, we needed a customer. We needed someone to say, we need this. And Creech Air Force Base, right in our backyard, very conveniently, said, we need that, because if their power goes down, Creech Air Force Base on the other side of the world from where they're flying their missions, the power goes down at Creech, they're part of the weapon system. And if they lose power, these things, like, they're not going to crash, but they're going to auto-land. They're just going to stop what they're doing, and they're going to come back and auto-land there where they took off from. So, but the way this business works is they might get some targets right away and do a mission, whatever, but sometimes they do all this reconnaissance for a week, a month, trying to figure out what's going on, gathering information, who's the bad guys. And then, after building that whole database on the bad guys, then, okay, we're going to launch this mission on this day. So what happens if power goes down on the other side of the world in Las Vegas? They've just lost their mission that they've been working towards. So it's really key that they have reliable power. So this has become the key customer at Creech Air Force Base, right here in our backyard. So we're working with them. As Jim mentioned, Colonel Tippett, a terrific guy. His replacement now is a terrific person, and I met him at Colonel Tippett's retirement. We're going to work closely on this. So basically, if the grid goes down for beyond a reasonable amount of time, Creech cannot fly their missions. National security. So picture this thing works out great for Creech, and then it's going to start multiplying in the military. Other bases, the Army gets it going, and then once we prove how safe and reliable this is, it might take 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, that's when the civilian sector says, okay, this has been proven out by the military, we trust it, we want this in our neighborhood. And that's when it will start multiplying throughout the country, and all these individual reactors and microgrids that I showed before will start showing up, tens of thousands of them, ending the problem of what happens if the grid goes down, because there will be no more the grid. So, so here we have the little thing of gold. Yucca Mountain, not a dump or a cemetery, it's a gold mine. But we want the gold mine for us now. We don't want to wait a couple hundred years for someone to say, wow, there's a gold mine there. So we can do things with this right away. Huge industry, and it brings research and PhDs and centers of excellence and secondary businesses that support those. It brings that into this area. And so this is what we're doing, but we're just so fortunate to have Creech Air Force Base, and the test site close by. It's the other thing we're looking to have, that first reactor at the test site, so it's safe. Like if it blows up, it's safe because they've blown up things that were a lot bigger there. So they know how to blow up big things safely. So if a reactor blows up, it's safe, it's not going to hurt anybody there. And then very conveniently, there's power lines already in place going from the test site down to Creech. So now it's not a secure microgrid, but we're just beginning to think about crawling. We're not walking, we're not running, but this is the beginning of the beginnings. So I think that's the last. Oh, no, one more slide. So there was this article back in later June that talked about, so they wanted to build this huge solar farm here, and the environmentalists said, we don't want that solar. Would you believe it? They don't want it. And the reason is, you look at all the land that these things take up. This looks like those towers near Prim, just before you drive across into California. But anyway, even if it's not that kind of thing where it's the mirrors you're focusing, if it's just solar panels, those solar panels are very intense to make. They take a lot of resources. I don't even know how many years it would take before the energy is given back that it took to produce them. But anyway, they're great things in people's houses. We use them. But the thing is, they last a certain amount of time, and then we have a disposal problem. They typically, I heard, ship them off to third world countries for them to build shelters with. I always have to bring this up. Sue back there said we should take all those solar panels and bury them in Yucca Mountain. So, I was like that. So anyway, that'd be a good use because we have a lot of space in Yucca Mountain because we won't be storing all those casks, which would be recycling. So given that the environmentalists don't like this and they're seeing the value of nuclear, there's, where is it? Oh yeah, this is tough to read. If only there were a reliable, I can't read it, power source that didn't require so much land. Oh wait, there is. Yeah, very good. Yeah, up there. So I wanted to give you the reality. Didn't want you to think I was making it up. So they are embracing the nuclear concept here. That's the key thing. And we just want to take this and run with it. There's been communication with the state that's going forward very nicely compared to it being a total standoff for all these years. We're not there yet, but we're working together, and it's a friendly arrangement, and we're looking to make this happen for Nevada before some other states see this opportunity and want to grab it into their state. That'd be the biggest shame of all this, is if we lost it to another state because they saw the vision and we didn't. So I think that's it, unless there's any questions. Yes?
The EMP you're referring to? Whatever those were.
EMP, electromagnetic pulse.
Yeah, that thing. It doesn't make any difference what source the energy is going to be. All electronics are going to be wiped out.
That's right.
Your little radio won't be able to speak.
Right.
So you won't be able, right?
Well,
Right.
that happened in one place, but 1,000 miles away, it wouldn't wipe out your device, but it would wipe out the power to your house in order to charge it. Now, the houses underneath that pulse, they're going to have some problems, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it wouldn't be 100% wipeout. It would just be in that localized area.
Any EMP place is going to be, and it's supposed to, EMPs are supposed to wipe out thousands of miles of stuff, right?
Well, it depends on the degree of it.
Okay,
How big
but
that is.
thousands of miles of stuff. And there's not, it doesn't make any difference what the energy is or anything like that. You won't be able to do it. You won't be able to turn your radio on.
Right.
No matter what kind of power you have. That's my problem.
Right. But it depends on how big that burst is.
Can I add
If
something
it's
there, Mark?
localized, then it's not that. If it's huge, then it's.
Creating an EMP is not trivial. Nuclear weapons create EMPs. They're the only thing that I can think of that can create a significant one. They certainly aren't 1,000 miles long. You're going to have very small area where you will have, yes, devastated electronics. But EMPs are not, thank goodness, simple things to create in kind of these doomsday scenarios. And that can be used right now to destroy any electronics. And what would you do? You would just replace those electronics? How can you replace them? By having tens of thousands of them as a backup and that are made modular. So again, it actually brings up more of an argument to go away from large grid.
In the 70s and 80s with computers, we were getting bigger and bigger supercomputers that were serving more and more people to locations. And then all of a sudden, this idea of a home computer, a personal computer, came up, and it radically changed everything that we do. So that now we're far more dependent on personal computers than we are for large mainframe computers. And so that made economic sense, and it's worked. And I think the analogy also could work here.
So I've got a question right
You
here.
know, hey, this is Steve here. Let me add a couple things to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's important to notice that those will be located underground, okay? So they'll be very well robustly protected from EMP
He's in
and
the
the radiation.
computer. He's in the computer.
No,
He's not actually physically here. So, go ahead, Steve. People were looking around.
They'd be
So-
located underground for one thing. The fuel would last at a minimum of 5 to 7 years, and some designs can last up to 30 years before they're refueled. And the intention is that the fuel will be handled by the person that puts the reactor in. It'll be a legacy that the manufacturer will have to take care of as part of it. So they're very elegant in that respect. And so they would almost be innocuous. You wouldn't see a big, huge cooling tower like you do today. It would be a small building on top, all the working parts downstairs, and very robustly shielded and for both EMP and from radiation. So they're a very different concept than what we're thinking of today with nuclear power reactors.
Okay, go ahead. We got a question right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it, what your presentation seemed like a real win-win for everybody. And it's really kind of a backdoor plan to get into the whole thing. But the situation still exists regardless. What do we do with all these spent rods that's all over the country? That's still got to be dealt with somewhere in the country.
Well, that's what we're talking about. We bring all that material here and we recycle it and we sell it.
It can all be recycled, of course.
No, a lot of it can. So go ahead and address that part, how much can be recycled that's out there.
Well, I'm going to talk about the 90%, which is commercial, not the military. Okay, so if we don't talk about the 10% that's military, the 90% that's commercial, then you're using the numbers that you have there. And I'll go along with that 97%.
Right.
Now, a friend of mine, professor, she's done the calculation to make it, I think, something intuitive. If you lived your entire life and all of your energy for your car, your house, everything you lived on, you use nuclear power for, and you use these reprocessing and recycling schemes. For your life, the entire amount of high-level waste that you would have to be concerned about is about the size of a plate. And so to give you just an intuition for how much waste, if we all just used only nuclear power, Eisenhower had his vision of the 1,000 nuclear power plants, then we really aren't talking about large amounts, large volumes. We've heard many times that we can put all the waste that we might generate, even with the once-through plants, and footprint-wise in a small place. That was the idea of Yucca Mountain. Yucca Mountain was sized for half of what we were going to have, because there's supposed to be a west side and an east side repository, and politics really mess things up.
Go ahead.
So let me try to more directly address that. This $2.2 million per day fine that the U.S. government is currently paying has to do with the failure of the federal government to fulfill its part of the bargain, manage this material, and the expenses that are incurred by utilities in maintaining these fields of spent nuclear fuel in above-ground containers. There's 70,000 tons, give or take, scattered across the country. And so the idea here would be to implement this recycle technology, the reprocessing technology, move that material into temporary storage, process it, and 97% of the material that's included in those spent fuel rods now becomes usable fuel for reactors as we move forward in the future. So it's an attempt to try to address that problem head on. And I would say that the effort of this team who put some of these ideas together has been not to identify the things that can't be done, but to try to find a positive path forward that makes sense, number one, and that really addresses almost all of the big issues that people have expressed, on both sides of the issue. So it really, this dispersed storage of spent nuclear fuel is an issue. It's an expense for the different states. Politics drives them to want to get that problem resolved, and that's in part what we try to do in coming up with these solutions.
Does that answer your question? Does that help you? Because what we want to do is use up this material. Use it up. I mean, we've got hundreds, how many years do we have of energy sitting at these 121 sites?
If we were to recycle?
Yes, we were to recycle.
Hundreds of years, if not thousands.
Hundreds of years, so we don't have to mine it.
Yeah, 100 years, yeah.
Mine another uranium mine ever again.
Possible. Hang on, Dwight's got a question, we'll get to you.
Yes, I thank you for thinking outside of the box here. It sounds like the position of this group is to move away from the
Original
long-term
plan.
storage
Yes.
into something that's more sane than that failed program. And I hope Knight County changes their resolution to back you up on this, away from long-term storage.
Right.
But my question is on micro reactors. I only know about the reactors now. They use water. They use the heat from the reactor to make steam to turn turbines to create electricity. That's the process. So in a desert state like Nevada or say Arizona or New Mexico, I'm wondering what the practicality of the reactor is, or does it take such little water and you're recycling the water? I guess I need to explain to me the water situation, because where they have nuclear plants, it's usually on a river or on the ocean, someplace where they have ready access to lots of water to make lots of steam to turn the turbine. We don't have lots of water here in Nevada to turn turbines, other than on the river where we have dams right now, turning the turbines from the water course. So explain to me the water situation.
Yeah.
Great question.
My recommendation would be to have nuclear power plants powering Nevada. In my opinion, if you don't have large accessible water, would be to use high temperature reactors. There are several that are already in commercial operation. One of the issues with the light water reactors is also the ambient temperature. The ambient temperature may be too hot in Nevada to actually support the current types of concepts. For example, I think the Westinghouse AP1000 would not likely would not work, again because of the ambient temperature. But gas-cooled reactors run at much higher temperatures. They don't use water to cool. They use air to cool. And so as long as you have a 50 degrees, so about 100 degree Fahrenheit temperature difference, you can actually use air to cool. And so that's what I think would be what I would look into if I were to try and find the right reactor design. I would agree that it may be difficult and may not be the right design to use water.
I partly agree with that comment, but I would point out that I believe the closest nuclear generating plant to where we are right now is Palo Verde. It has a climate that's similar to what we have here. It's a water-cooled reactor, And these are the largest reactors in the United States, maybe in the world. And so they're operating very close to where we are on water-cooled system. Now, just a point of clarification is that water that cools the reactor core is completely recycled. So it isn't like a stream of water coming in and a stream of water coming out. The waste heat that must be taken away from any power plant, whether it's coal or nuclear, there's waste heat that has to be taken away. And that's typically what you see with the big cooling towers, or it's why you see so many large reactors located on the sea or the river. So that's a separate issue, but Palo Verde doesn't have that. And so they've been very creative in using wastewater that is collected and used for a big part of their waste heat removal. But I'd say Palo Verde is a good example of current reactor technology that's sort of addressed that problem. Future reactors in the next generation would include high temperature gas reactors, but also fast reactors, which, not to get too technical on it, operate with neutrons that have much higher energy, and these are the types of reactors that are most effective in destroying and consuming these actinide components of spent nuclear fuel, which are exactly the ones that require 20,000 years or 100,000 years, it basically turns it into a resource. So metal cooled reactors in particular offer that either with sodium as a coolant or with heavy metals like lead. And these are all being evaluated, developed as we speak.
Go ahead, Brian.
If we're going to close the loop on that, also molten salts.
Molten salt.
We're looking at thorium-based molten salt systems. There's some nice things about thorium systems as well. I was really just getting to the point you don't necessarily have to look at having to have water. You can come up with reactor designs that don't use water and that can also be made in a hot climate. And that's why I brought up the high temperature reactors. It's something that actually might be appropriately developed for the desert. But there are several new concepts. These concepts have been in research now for 20 or 30 years, just with the Gen 4 reactors.
Right.
But we've been looking at this. I remember Bill Gates.
Right.
Bill Gates was supporting the traveling wave reactor. Well, that reactor is been proposed decades ago. When I was at UNLV, that was one of the reactors we were looking at. And when our provost had heard about Bill Gates coming out supporting this, he turned to me and said, "Tony, why aren't we doing this research? We should do this research." And I said, "We are doing this research. We've been doing it for 10 years, and because Bill Gates mentioned it, it got headlines." So there are some really, really interesting nuclear research that has been done, that can be done, continue to be done. And I have so many I want to throw at you that can work at these different types of research centers. And I'm going to bring up another Nobel laureate at another talk I went to. He said the way that, this is now 30 years ago, the way that we were going to solve the energy crisis, he said, is you take the water molecule, and whoever can figure out how to separate the water molecule, hydrogen from the oxygen in the water molecule, this Nobel laureate said that is going to be the energy of the future. Well, we've now learned alpha and beta radiation can split the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. It doesn't do it as one process. It's a several step process. There are now companies that are looking into doing that research. And we might be coming full circle.
Good. So does that address your water issue?
Yeah, it
Okay.
does. Now, the next issue would be, it sounds like you're proposing a national solution to nuclear energy. We have existing nuclear plants that depend upon these rods that we have now. We'd be moving to these different type of reactor. So is it the position that you guys are taking that you're going to negotiate with the United States Congress to totally change the direction of the program of the United States away from where we're at now to this new future? And what we would do here in Nevada would be store all of the nuclear waste that's been stored at the power plants around the country, and I guess military bases around the country here, in exchange for this technology center and working towards these micro reactors and so forth. That's sort of the plan.
I don't think so. I think
You're biting off the whale here rather than
yeah, we are. So this is a huge issue, but our goal is to take the material from the current reactors and recycle it, right? Can you address that? Eventually we want the current light water reactors that are out there to go away because they're not as safe as the new. Right. We want to go to the microgrids to solve a couple of problems. First of all, we get rid of the light water reactors that are not as safe as the current ones that are being developed, and we deal with the waste issue. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And as far as, so you had an issue about water, what was your?
Yes, sir. We're all talking about the reactor.
Hang on a second. You're going to break your mic.
I really believe the reactor issue has been well covered. All right? What does the reactor do? The reactor creates heat, which will heat a working fluid, correct?
Right.
It will drive a steam turbine or a turbine of some kind, right?
Right.
Okay. Your primary working fluid typically does not use a lot of volume, okay? In the steam power plant, that's your steam and your condensate. You run it through the turbine, you inject it back into either an air-cooled or water-cooled condenser, where that water is now, high-quality water is recycled back through the steam turbine, through the heating element, back to the turbine, cooled back into water, goes around. Now, you're talking about Palo Verde.
Speaking to the microphone, please.
Yeah, speak into the microphone a little bit closer, yeah. Eat the microphone.
Like really close.
It's on.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you. All right. All right. Suggestion. Google Mr. Rankin's cycle. The steam cycle, steam and water cycle. It can be other working fluids, but that's what I wanted to hear is how these small reactors are going to work. I realize that you've got this well figured out on how to create the heat. Okay?
Okay.
Once we have the heat, Mr. Rankin cycle doesn't care whether it's buffalo chips, sunshine, nuclear power. Okay? That becomes your issue. In a power plant, the vast majority of the systems are in Mr. Rankin cycle. It's in Rankin cycle. Okay? So please, let's talk about the whole thing. Gentlemen, you have the reactor figured out. I am impressed, okay? That's kind of like, I'm very impressed with the gasoline or the boiler that's creating heat. What am I doing with it after that? Where's the heat used? How it's used? How am I going to recycle it? Okay.
Okay, would one of you guys like to address that?
Let me try to address that, and you're absolutely right that in a Rankine cycle system, you're only about 30 some odd percent efficient. That means that 60 some odd percent is waste heat that needs to be removed. And that's what's used to recondense the working fluid. Okay, so the thermodynamics of that are such that if you're operating another system at similar temperatures, you're still going to have the same ratio. But if you can go to a higher temperature operation, You know, for example, with a gas-cooled reactor or lead-cooled reactor, then the efficiency goes up considerably. Then there are other cycles beyond the Rankine cycle that you can use. The Brayton cycle is the one that he's mentioned, and it's you know, it's basically the same principle that you have with the jet engine, where you have combustion that expands a gas through a turbine and then is exhausted. That's the Brayton cycle, and at least one of the reactor concepts that's being explored under this microreactor program is a closed Brayton cycle reactor. It looks a lot like a jet engine. And so, but none of these are 100% efficient. They all have a certain amount of waste heat. Any thermal process is going to have that. It doesn't matter whether you're burning natural gas or oil or coal or generating heat with a nuclear reactor. So, I mean, you're right on that. It's always an issue. That waste heat needs to be taken away. Yes.
Now you have to basically work like an air conditioner. Force cool steam back into the liquid, heat, bring it right back around. I see that cycle.
So what are the issues with that? What do you have to do to eliminate the heat? Once he says you've used it, what are the problems with that?
Well, the laws of thermodynamics tell you that if you go from one form from heat, let's say, form of energy to electricity, it's not 100% efficient.
Right.
And so there'll always be a waste.
Right.
And,
But what's the problem with that waste?
it just needs to be exhausted to the environment.
And-
Well, so there are processes that you can use to extract more energy out of that heat, called cogeneration, and put it to other use. For example, in cold weather conditions, you can use it for district heating. So there are other energy-related products. I mean, this gets a little bit afield from recycling and why do you want to do it, but ultimately you want to extract as much energy out and put it to useful work as you can. And the first thing, the easiest thing to do is to operate a reactor at a higher temperature and move your efficiency up from, say, 30% to 40%. And that means that for a given level of output, you have less waste heat.
Very well put. Bottom line, you have the limitations on the equipment. Reaching point where the equipment cannot spin at a higher temperature.
You're right, and that's what we found with the main challenge in research for the high temperature concepts, and by the way, the Department of Energy set that. This was about 20 years ago at about 1,000 degrees Celsius. And you come to a materials cliff at about 850 degrees Celsius. So if you're going to go with a high temperature design, our materials is going to pretty much limit that to about 850 degrees Celsius. That's still well above ambient temperature, where I was mentioning you can still exchange with the air. Yes, thermodynamics, any power system you're going to use, whether it's going to be coal, gas, or nuclear, you are going to be using either chemical energy or nuclear energy. It's not going to be 100%, and yes, you are going to have to put that waste heat somewhere. If you have water around you, that's one of the nicest commodities to dump it to. It does cause some problems with some countries had to shut their nuclear power plants down because they went above the limit of the river heating, so they actually had to shut the reactors down in Europe, so there are some limitations there. The steam towers are nice too, but what I'm saying is with desert environments, can scientists, can engineers figure out how to use an air-cooled system where you don't have to use water if you don't have it. If you have water, then absolutely, that's the standard.
Right.
But it's not a requirement.
What, Darrell?
Hey, Jim?
Go ahead.
Jim?
Yeah.
Yes, I want to kind of bring this back a little bit to a focus because we're really talking about the spent fuel option, but I want to point out to that guy that's talking that this is the kind of research we can do here. If this stuff comes here, this is the place we're going to do all that research. This is the place that we're going to come up with the ideas for next generation reactors and next generation fuels. It all started with recycling the current spent fuels we have now. And Nevada can get that work just for the asking. I just want to make that point.
Great point. Great point.
Steve, this is Craig, and thanks, that's a good point. One other point that I think we need to make in the context of small and micro reactors, the challenge of getting rid of the waste heat is huge when you have a huge reactor. If it's 60% waste heat out of a 1,000 megawatt reactor, you can do the math. That's a huge amount of heat that has to be put out into the environment, whether it's the ocean or the river or the air. The smaller reactor, you'll have the same percentages, but much smaller total output. So the degree of the difficulty is much less. One of the reactors that I'm familiar with, which I believe is at about 20 megawatt output level, is designed so that it doesn't use any water for rejection of waste heat. It rejects that heat directly to the ground and has the technology to do that. So there are solutions. As Steve says, this is a ripe area for study, and it's something that could be done in a national lab type environment.
Right. And we want to do that here. Go ahead. Who has the line? Go ahead, Darrell. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Darrell Lacey. I'm the director of the Nye County Nuclear Waste Office. I've been working on Yucca Mountain issues now for over 12 years. So, I want to maybe tell some of the rest of the story here that may be missed here, and maybe correct a couple of misunderstandings maybe. One is back to the cost issue. The total life cycle cost for Yucca Mountain was $96 billion, which included about $60 billion to build it, and $36 billion to bring all the waste here and replace it. So $60 billion for building it, which is what some people tend to get the numbers conflated or whatever, trying to compare this versus WIP or versus the other alternatives here. 2, Yucca Mountain is built as a retrievable repository. It was one of the only ones designed that way for the very reason that we can pull the waste easily out. It doesn't have to be mined. It's designed to be, you'll grab a canister and pull it out, reprocess it or repackage it or whatever's needed to be done. That's one of the advantages of Yucca Mountain that most of the other places in the U.S. did not have. Now let's get to the timing and kind of cost issues that play into this. Yucca Mountain had a legislative cap of 70,000 metric tons. We've been talking primarily about the spent fuel. A lot of the defense waste has already been reprocessed and is in what's called a high-level waste form today. That high-level waste is probably not going to ever be reprocessed. It's waste. If we go through a recycling operation of the type that you're talking about here, you're still going to have some high-level waste that needs a home. We always need a permanent repository, whether it's Yucca Mountain or somewhere else. We do need a repository somewhere. By doing it with recycling, you can maybe make that repository last 100 years to 1,000 years, and we only need one for the country, where if we do the things that you're talking about without recycling, but we still build new reactors, then we need more Yucca Mountains somewhere else. Yucca Mountain was designed for 70,000 metric tons. We've got 80,000 metric tons of waste in inventory today. We're generating 2,500 to 3,000 metric tons a year in the current reactors, most of which here will have a useful life of another 10 to 30 years. So that's where the second repository that Dr. Hechanova was saying is necessary and what was kind of in the original plan. That was for the existing inventory of reactors. We needed 2 repositories.
Repository meaning dump.
Well, I said Yucca Mountain is designed as a engineered repository where you can remove the waste and do something else with it in the future. It's not a dump. It's not like a landfill like most people think of when they use the term dump. The people who are against Yucca Mountain are the ones who like to call it a dump because that has a negative connotation. Yucca Mountain is engineered. We'll come over to the museum. I can show you what the design and stuff would be. We have all of the information center from DOE over there and with lots of other types of information. Now back to the discussion today about small modular reactors. I agree wholeheartedly with it. That's what we need to be moving towards as a country. The recycling is a little more complicated maybe than some of us are looking at here. France has a recycling facility. For us as the United States, because of our volumes, just to keep up with the existing amount of material that we produce, we would need 2 facilities the size of France's. So it's not 25 billion, it's 50 billion just to keep up. And that's not to go back into the existing inventory of 80,000 metric tons and reprocess any of that. That's just to keep up with what we are producing as we are moving forward. So there's a few issues there. The current reprocessing technologies and the current light water reactor technologies that we have, with the technologies that we're operating today, the commercial technologies, are not what some of these people are talking about here. They're talking about some future technologies that are 30 to 50 years down the road. I'm not saying they're not great. I'm not saying we should be working towards them. But if we had Yucca Mountain, we might have leverage to help get some of those research and other technologies here.
Exactly.
Right.
If we don't have Yucca Mountain here, we don't have much leverage to say, okay, we want that research facility here versus Lawrence Livermore or Sandia or wherever else it's going to be fighting for that research program and the research dollars. 12 national labs? How many national labs are there out there? Something like that. 17. Okay. Some
10 science for DOE.
Okay. So all of those
Hey, Daryl?
places are fighting for the research dollars today also.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, so here's my perspective, and the one we're trying to get across is this attitude that we've done over the years has not worked. We've been almost 2 generations now where we haven't solved what is arguably the easiest part of the nuclear fuel picture, and that very fact is not the only problem, but one of the major problems stopping us from moving on to the next generation of nuclear. So if we don't try a new paradigm or a new approach, we probably won't proceed. My concept is that if we get jobs and money and economic development for Nevada, maybe they'll become a consent state. They have not heard this concept. They've dug their heels on the repository. There will be some need for a repository. The volume is about 1/5 of what we really needed. And we'd only need it, like you said, for 100 to 1,000 years, not for millions of years. So the idea is if we can convince Nevada to become a consent state based on the economic development that rolls through from recycling, we solve a whole lot of problems, and we get our foot in the energy business of this country, which is a $1.2 trillion a year business. Going the way we were before has not worked. I mean, it's just not moving forward. Nevada's going to dig their heels in. They're going to argue this thing for another 2 generations, and it's just not going to work. So our idea is to try a new paradigm and a new approach, and maybe we can move this off the dime. I mean, that's just the thing we're thinking.
All I'm suggesting, Steve, is that we use Yucca as the crown jewel of a much larger nuclear research and development type of program and not just a dump, yes.
Right.
But without Yucca, we don't have much leverage either.
But it doesn't work without recycling. It doesn't make any sense to bury it in the ground, pull it out in 100 years. We should be recycling right now if we're ever going to recycle it. And that would be the catalyst that generates Nevada interest in coming in and becoming a consent state, or another state to be the catalyst to come in and be a consent state.
The current technology will work with Purex, which it doesn't make sense to build Purex recycling facility. I'm sure you agree with that. It doesn't make sense to build a Purex recycling facility.
So to address that issue, nearly all of the waste that we have out there now, the spent nuclear fuel, is in an oxide form. Uranium oxide was the fuel. And that, it links to this Purex process for separation. When you go to advanced reactors, and there's two reasons to want to do that. One is because it's the next thing after water-cooled reactors with enhanced safety and economics, but also, and this is really key, it's these new reactors, especially the fast spectrum reactors, have the capability of consuming the constituents of spent nuclear fuel that drive the very long lifetime of a repository. And so you need to have a fuel processing facility that does two things. And maybe it needs to be twice the size in terms of capacity as the French program. It needs to be able to handle the Purex front end for existing backlog, but it needs to eventually have a secondary capability built in for what we call pyrochemical processing. And that's more, it's better adapted to the new fuels envisioned for some of the future
Well,
reactors.
the traveling waves and the prism reactors that can utilize waste as a fuel, I agree, those are definitely the ways of the future. We're just not there yet.
No, we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
But that's part of the scheme here, and I think you're just exactly, focused directly on what we've been talking about in terms of this being the crown jewel. It's the way to get this going and to move forward. And I think we're all on board with it.
Okay.
I guess.
And then one other thing that was mentioned earlier, which is the earthquakes. The Yucca Mountain was designed for 1 million years. When it was designed, the over-conservatism is mind-boggling with what was put in there. When you design for construction, you design based on ground motion, not based on the size of an earthquake in Richter scales or whatever ends up moving the ground, and then the damage comes from ground movement. The design for Yucca Mountain was such that the ground movement was higher than anything that's ever been seen on this earth. The earth cannot transmit that kind of energy that it was designed for, so it was just a goofy extrapolation to 1 million years that people did to be very ultra-conservative. The Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, which was the technical oversight group for Yucca Mountain, just about the time that we shut down the project, or about the time the license was issued, instructed DOE to do a study. They put an expert panel together. They issued their report in 2013. NRC reviewed it in 2017, stamped off on that, and basically it said is that Yucca Mountain was way over-designed. So, and it still met the regulatory issues that were there as far as amount of radiation getting out of the mountain. But at the levels of motion that Yucca would see under the design, the canisters that are 200,000 pound chunks of steel were bouncing around like ping pong balls inside the mountain. It can't happen that way. Yet the design and the process safety assessment still said that it's safe and that it meets the regulatory standards. So the concerns that are being brought up about earthquakes in Yucca Mountain is kind of a red herring because that's not there. And in general, Yucca was over-designed for the earthquakes that we can see.
Great point.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Frank.
But here's the concept, here's the thing, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve, go ahead.
The thing that's holding us up is we have 50 non-consent states. Not a single consent state. This is not going to move forward until we get a consent state. So the basic issue is what do we do to entice some state, Nevada or some other state, to be a consent state so we can move forward. And none of the rest of the things matter until we get that.
Go ahead.
Okay. Following Mr. Lacey's comments, I'm concerned with the $120 million appropriation for DOE to complete just the studies precedent to the licensing is just stalled, as it's been held up for 2 years now. That's going to preclude doing anything at Yucca. Temporary storage, reprocessing, and what is the opinion about that? I'm hearing some that ideas that we can just forget about that, but that means going all the way back to the beginning, I think would just be a favor.
Yeah, no, we don't do that. So, like I said, I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago. I met with the Senate side staffers about this, and they have a bill that's going through right now. And what they want to do is to finish that process. They said before we do anything else, we've got to finish the process that was started. And I made sure to tell the guys, and he understands this clearly, that that doesn't mean that we go forward from there with the original plan of Yucca. I said, if you do that, I said, not only will my group be not on board, but you won't have anybody in Nevada that will support this. They clearly understand that. So, but he did tell me that they have to finish that one process, and it's like a study, an environmental process, and once they finish that, they're very open to what we're proposing. And not only on our side, the more Republican or conservative side, but even some of the Democrats are now looking at this.
Well, right now we've got Cortez and Masto holding up DOE appointees, just one vote. And what's going to stop that from just being perpetual logjam? Because she's got to pay field aid to her mentor, Harry Reid's obsession with just stopping anything at Yucca Mountain.
Right.
What's going to get overcome that?
Well, they're currently...
In my mind, the only thing that's going to get over that is if we can get a consent state. If a state walks into the president and says, we'll do it under these conditions, this changes the whole paradigm. We no longer need to worry about all that stuff because now you have a state that will consent to take it. It will change, it'll be a game changer for all of this stuff. But if we keep down this line, yes, Nevada's going to dig in their heels, they're going to go in the Ninth Circuit Court and file lawsuits, and we'll be dealing with for two more generations. And that's what my main perspective is, to try to stop that or short circuit that.
Sometimes to achieve a unifying, overwhelming national purpose, you have to overrule petty, petulant politics.
Here, here.
Yep, that's right.
Absolutely, but it hasn't worked. That's my point.
I think we've got somebody as our president that's willing to take a look at that.
Now, another question is quick. Are SMRs and MSRs essentially a reverse scalability? Is that what we have, a reverse scalability in nuclear? So the smaller is actually the more efficient and the less problematic.
Go ahead.
By going smaller, they were able to do away with the biological containment, and it's now all underground. You couldn't do that when you had the larger scale. So there were definitely advantages to going small. And also because of that, and because it's smaller, it can't melt down. The natural convection into the ground will handle any accident.
Yeah, and so I'm not exactly sure what you mean by reverse scaling, but from an economic standpoint, just to be upfront, I think most people would agree that the cost per kilowatt hour production cost of electricity will probably be higher than for a large reactor, but the capital cost would be much lower. And one of the problems we have in this country is that the price tag of a large reactor has become so great that it is beyond the threshold of some utilities even to go there, because any delay or cost increase or whatever, could put them into bankruptcy. So small reactors have that attractive feature of being more of a bite-sized chunk, if you will.
We have a couple of questions right back here. Who's got a mic? Okay, go right here. Joe, if you could get on the mic.
Hi there. I am not a nuclear person. I've been around it all my life. However, what concerns me and what I think every person in this room should be concerned about is if nuclear is coming here by truck, by train, it isn't safe. Not even 2 or 3 months ago, we had a train derailed with live ammunition and equipment. Even San Bernardino had a train fall away, and it went all the way down. The last place it could be stopped was Pico Rivera, which they did, and it derailed there. But safety, safety, safety. How are you going to get all this stuff here?
Okay, good point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of our cons that we want to address. So go ahead, Ron.
Just to give you some numbers, there have been 3,000 used nuclear fuel transports worldwide with no single accident. 24,000 worldwide.
We're not moving anything yet.
We're moving a lot of it.
We're moving it constantly, ma'am. It's
Fresh
constantly
fuel,
being
used fuel,
transported.
It's always in motion around the world. And the amount of radiation you could get from one of those trucks, if it's a truck transport, is
They come
maximum.
through here too.
Yeah, they could come through here. The maximum on one of those trucks is 10 milligram per hour at 6 feet. You ladies who get your annual mammograms, you're getting 40 milligram from that mammogram. So you'd have to park next to that truck, right beside it, be 6 feet or closer to that fuel, the spent fuel, to get the dose of one natural.
And you're saying it is safe to
It
bring
is
all
safe.
this fuel
It's safe.
through?
This is a red herring also.
It's a red herring. You know, we've been transporting stuff out of the test site. We transport live nuclear weapons. We transport live nuclear weapons to our bases, either by air or by rail. We know how to do it. The transport of those vehicles, you could crash one of those vehicles, dump half of the fuel truck or the fuel around it, set it on fire for a couple hours, and there's no release of the radioactive material. Those are the tests we've done. The last of those tests, we literally parked it and ran a diesel locomotive into it to see if we could damage the cask enough to cause a release. We were unable to.
You can actually see the documentary on TV of them doing that.
Actually, if I may, if you'll go down, as Daryl Lacey had stated, to the Trump Museum, there's a wonderful video there. You can educate yourself on the transportation. It's amazing what they've done, so I hope you'll take that opportunity.
All right, go ahead, right back here. These guys have been waiting for a while. Go ahead. Get a mic to them. Who's got the mic?
I have a mic.
Okay. Get him real quick.
Because I have a question. Actually, I have several.
Okay.
Who's first?
Give the mic to him first. He's been waiting for a while. He's
Kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
He's had his hand out the whole.
The baton.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, now, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. I'm not a nuclear scientist or anything like that. I hear this gentleman over here talking about the volumes of backlog versus going forward. My initial kind of thought about what I'm hearing is that we're converting this stuff into a different type or quality of fuel that can be more efficiently used so that there's less waste in it. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
We don't have to change the type of fuel. Pretty much for current reactor fuels in this country, it would take about 2.5 of the quote used reactor fuel rods to make one new one. Because we're starting at about 5% enriched in the right uranium that we want to use. We burn it down to maybe 2 or 2.5%. So roughly half of the uranium that we want in there that's the primary source of reaction is still there when we take the fuel rods out. Because it's not as efficient with half of it as it was with 5. So the remaining uranium that was in there, which was originally 95% of it, part of that uranium that was the non-fissile part, uranium-238, is being converted into plutonium. So one of the options is we not only take out the uranium-235, which we take about 2.5 fuel rods to make one new one, we also take out the plutonium. Now it only takes about 2 fuel rods to make one brand new one. We are concerned, we don't want to use mixed oxide fuel, that's the uranium and the plutonium. Every reactor operator in the world is still using mixed oxide fuel because once you start the reactor up, it's making plutonium and it's using it.
So that begs the question, is plutonium used for anything other than weapons?
It can be used for weapons, it can be used for fuel, it can be used in a variety if we need just a radiation source. Right now, all of the medical isotopes that we use in this country is in effect reprocessed uranium fuel. And we take it out to make the stuff we're using for the heart scans, Molly Tech, Dispatch, and all these other things. The iodine that we use to treat some various things to react by it. It's all coming from the processing field. The last few years, we've been primarily using.
Talk up, please.
We've been using primarily Canadian rubber, some RTGs, yeah. So it's out there, we're using it, we use cesium and cobalt to do lots of things. All these new roads are being built around the state. They're using a gauge to determine both the density of the concrete of the soil and the moisture content. Every one of those is a radioactive source. Every one of you is a radioactive source. If you happen to have a sleeping partner, you're adding about 2.5 millirem or so to their dose. So sleep separate if you don't remember. Again, it's funny, but every one of us has radioactive material in us.
So where I'm trying to get to with this is one simple thing. He was talking about we have light water reactors and they're generating all this fuel. We've got a backlog we're talking about going forward.
We have a backlog, it's a huge backlog. We stopped the process under President Carter because he felt that if we stopped reprocessing fuel in the U.S., other countries would follow suit and not produce.
I understand all that. I have a different question. The question is, this technology that we're developing, does it have the potential to replace the light water reactors that are causing us all the problem with waste? Are we going to get our waste more manageable in the first step of the process instead of just trying to use a process that's not efficient and control the waste?
This is where I was saying that I think waste is a misnomer for used fuel, because used fuel is...
Robert, go ahead, Robert. Get the mic to Robert there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. This is for the panel. Anybody who wants to speak the issue is fine. Dr. Echanova, you have no idea how my heart jumped out of my throat when I saw you.
Good to see you, Robert.
It's wonderful to see you. Basically, you probably will want to address this issue. It's going to jump a little bit away from what we're talking about specifically with this issue. I'm concerned about two things because of the gentleman that just spoke to the radiological issue and the biologic atmosphere. Have the studies from Chernobyl been completed for the world to consume? Because I now understand they're now using it as a travel site now for humans to go to. And has the former Soviet Union gotten rid of all the reactors that led up to, that were designed similarly to Chernobyl? And what concerns do we have for the future dealing with another Chernobyl, if possible? Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Some of the studies at Chernobyl, the ones that are now coming out with 25 years after, so there's quite a bit of good information coming from that. 3 Mile Island, I think, just had its 30-year anniversary. Again, there's a lot of good information coming out of that. Nothing earth-shattering, I mean, groundbreaking. It pretty much is consistent with what we've thought of. And yes, Chernobyl, a lot of people have come back to Chernobyl. Some people never left. Some people were required to leave. But it actually left Chernobyl to grow back into what back to nature, to what it was. In answer to your question about the RBM case, no, I believe there's still some of those operating. I know they're trying to get rid of them. But remember, if you got rid of some of these plants, someone had mentioned that they use it for district heating. It's true. I've been to Snowbefore, which is an RBMK. And in the wintertime, the city next door is not solid frozen because the steam pipes were coming from the RBMK and warming up the city. So some of them, it's not just power, it's heat, especially in the cold northern parts of Russia. So to my understanding, yes, some of those still operate. But you have to remember, they learned the lesson from Chernobyl. They did not operate it at proper operating conditions. Correct. You know it was not under normal operation. They were shutting it down for an outage, and then some foolish non-nuclear engineer.
Political,
Or political hat.
political, that's what happened. That's why we had Chernobyl, was the
In
politician got
a
involved.
socialist, dictatorial fashion, said you're going to do this. And any nuclear engineer said, well, it's going to blow up if you're in the reactor at that condition.
That's why, go ahead,
Let
sir.
me change one word there that you used. Chernobyl did not blow up. It was not a nuclear explosion. Because the reactor operators, for whatever reason, political or otherwise, wanted to see just how low they could go of producing their own power to run their own electricity, took it down to where it went into shutdown mode. They then chatted about this for a while. Had they waited about a day and a half to 2 days to restart, they would have been fine. They waited a few hours and decided they were going to restart it. Instead of doing a fairly standard restart, they just started pulling out the control rods that control the reactor. They basically had them almost all the way out. Well, something happens in a reactor called creation of poisons. Remember the fission products that you mentioned? Some of those isotopes that are formed absorb neutrons very readily. Well, when they absorb a neutron, then they go away. Well, as the neutrons started building up and started burning up the fuel, the reactor went critical. I've seen the form, the picture of the thing. It went zip like this to somewhere 10, maybe 100 times its normal power output. When it did that, the heat flashed all the water in the reactor to steam. That blew the top off the reactor, blew the hole in the top of the building. It was a steam explosion caused by inappropriate action of the reactor. Over several days, then they brought guys in, they had them running across the roof, throwing these graphite blocks back in. We, the health physics community, assumed there would be a large number of cancer deaths from that. There were almost none, which just totally startled us in the health physics community. I went to a conference about 2 decades later. They said, we looked at the numbers of those guys that were up there on the roof, throwing the graphite blocks back in. Very few cancers. Basically, in the communities around there where nobody told the ladies, don't feed your babies milk from the cows that were eating the grass that was contaminated with iodine, we saw several additional cancer modules. I think there were 3 cancer deaths in children. They were quite concerned with that. I talked to a lady who was in charge in her country of monitoring those. Had they simply said something about, hey, there's now radioactive iodine out there, don't feed the babies the milk, there would have been none of those. So we knew what to do because politically the information was not shared. There were some additional consequences. Now, I have friends who've gone over there to look at the melted fuel down at the bottom. Not something I plan to do. I don't do the extra dose. But it was not dangerous for them to do. We saw that dose in the United States. At that time, the monitoring system that EPA ran did not give me immediate data. The person who was in charge of the lab then had to wait 2.5, 3 days to see it. We very clearly saw it at higher levels than we saw it in Fukushima.
Both reactors don't have secondary containment.
And they don't have secondary containment. So Fukushima, you said, what happened there? Well, once the tsunami wiped out the backup power, it took out the local grid, and it took out the backup power for those systems. There was no longer a way to recirculate the spent fuel coolant. So the fuel that had been taken out of the one reactor just weeks before slowly generates heat and eventually generates enough heat to boil the water away. Some of those rods then literally reacted and dumped radioactive gases into the top of the reactor building. Some of those came out doors, and some of it came out in the water.
All right, well, Sue, go ahead. We'll do one last question. Or did you have a question also? Okay, 2. And we'll do 3. All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to identify with the lady sitting here as an MD myself, not in my backyard, with selective hearing, which would be like listening, having a brain tumor and listening to a plumber tell me how to treat it.
Right.
That's what most of us that were NIMBYs or are NIMBYs are doing. They're not listening to the people, these people up here with the knowledge.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that I'm opposite of what she said now, because I did get the knowledge and I did get down the path of truth and what's real with experts. And I came to the conclusion, I made a couple of notes, why are small modular reactors necessary? The sooner the better. And my fear is our fragile, antiquated, vulnerable, stretched to its limit grid system.
Right.
Our grid system can be taken down, like I think Marty talked about, through cyber, direct attack on our high and extra high voltage transformers. They're not laying around to replace. They take about a year, at least a year to build. We don't have them laying around. And I think what wasn't really stressed is people hear, oh, the grid can go down, like Marty was talking about in his presentation. Well, that could be up to a year. And I think that's where people don't realize electricity and power is the lifeblood of our society today. And if that goes down, when you go home today, think about how you depend on electricity. My God, the kids won't have their iPhones, they'll be committing suicide. There's no heat, there's no electric. You can't flush your toilet. You don't have water out of your faucet. Where are you going to get food? We live in Nevada. Where are you going to get water? You're going to die. Millions of people are going to die very quickly. And our enemies know this. Just think Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. They know this. This is better than taking planes down. This is how they're going to get us. And all you have to do is think Puerto Rico. Look what happened there. Their grid system was taken down. Thousands of people died. And when the military came in with a nuclear-powered, some nuclear power off the coast there, and helped these people, everybody helped them. If we have one of these electromagnetic pulse, and it happened in, I think the last one was 1859, we're way overdue for another one. If this happens, it's called a coronal mass.
Right.
And when it happened in 1859, it was called the Carrington event. And we only had like very little. We didn't have a grid system.
Yeah.
So it wasn't much, but the power poles, things they had, blew up. So this could happen anytime. And if you want a good taste of it, go up to Boulder, Colorado, and go through the NOAA. They have a room where they study the sun. They sit in there every day, 24/7, and they're watching the sunspots. And every once in a while, we're overdue for one of these coronal masses.
Yep.
Read up on this thing. Don't listen to the politicians. Don't listen to your neighbors. Get it from the experts. So a few thoughts to live with you, and I talked about it. If the grid's taken down, no hospital, no toilets, none of that, we'll be back in the 1700s, or worse. Not to mention the roving gangs, and they better not take our guns here in Nevada, because you're going to need them, because they don't have power, they don't have what, they'll be coming after what you have.
Exactly.
Our grid system can be easily down for a year or more, and think of Puerto Rico. And as former Congressman Trent Franks from Arizona, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, head of the EMP, Ted Koppel wrote a whole book on that. We're all seniors here. You know who Ted Koppel was, Nightline. He wrote a book called Lights Out. Get that book. It will make your hair stand on end. It's what keeps them up at night.
That's
And
why
our
we're trying to deal with it.
Our enemies are probing, and they have the technology to do this. So we must stop the fear-mongering, politics, and lobbying for votes on fear. Facts are our greatest weapon against ignorance. And deal with the facts, move forward with these experts up here in this field with a common goal of protecting the United States, not just looking, keep it out of Nevada. We're the United States, we're patriotic Americans. So our country, other countries are moving past us really quick in this field. Well, we're debating last century technology. We were just over in the Middle East. We were in Abu Dhabi. We were over in the Oman. We were over in Israel. They're going way ahead of us. They're not worrying about all this. We need a safe, carbon-free recycling technical center established at the Nevada security site. And we're told if you see something, say something. We all need to use our voices and do that, do something. The slogan, screw Nevada, it's being taken in the wrong context. If we do nothing not to take advantage of this recycling small modular reactors to secure our grid, like other countries are doing, we're surely screwing Nevada. So we
Right.
need to think in a different direction. And these guys, I want to thank every one of you for coming here and taking your valuable time and the years you spent educating yourselves. Thank you, every one of you, for doing this.
Right.
I want to thank you gentlemen for coming. I have a couple of questions here. First one being, who are these companies that have an interest in recycling, sterilization, and the building of these nuclear reactors are the companies that exist now? The other part is, do any of you have any financial interest in any of these companies?
I wish.
And sir, you said that you didn't want Yucca Mountain to become a dump, but rather a place to store nuclear fuel for eventual recycling.
Right.
The key word is eventual. Once it's built, promise is forgotten, and the only guarantee is that it'll become a dump.
Right, we have to keep that from happening. We have to elect the right people to keep that from happening.
Hello? Okay. I'll go ahead and quickly answer on my part. I'm on vacation. It's summer break from my university. I work for the Abu Dhabi government, and I'm not here speaking on their behalf. I have absolutely no interests, remunerations, anything with any company. And I'm here seeing a lot of my friends and former students. Companies that are putting their money into this, they're big ones. This morning I read an article, Rolls-Royce is doing one in the UK. I mentioned already Bill Gates, he has a company, and there are many putting into TerraPower, looking at thorium, also looking at thorium concepts. So they're every major player in electric power. It behooves them to get involved in this because this is the way it's going to happen, and it is happening. This is not what we were talking about 10 years ago with the Gen 4 reactors, which were all things we were thinking that we were going to develop. Small modular reactors are now happening.
Yeah.
Okay, and let me also assure you that I have no financial interest in any of the companies that are producing reactors or fuel cycle services. I would say that exactly what you said is correct. The big companies are there. Small companies are there too. So two of the companies that would come to mind would be Westinghouse and General Electric.
General Atomics also.
We've all heard of them. Both companies have traditionally been in the reactor build business and also in the fuel cycle, fuel fabrication business. There are other companies that are doing these things as well. On the other end of the spectrum, there are some smaller companies that are actively involved in this. One of the companies that I'm familiar with has 6 employees, and they appear to be a real candidate for one of the first reactors that's being considered by the Department of Defense. So, and then there are other companies that are dedicated to fuel fabrication, and they would be logical companies to be interested in this technology. So there's not a fuel cycle company that's involved with the concept development that we're going here, but I think we all have colleagues that somewhere in that industry. But no, there's no financial interest.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I did work for Bechtel Corporation in several of their areas. And my husband worked for Calvert Cliffs and Peach Bog. One thing, as we were talking, and I'm looking at this picture here. You know, Nye County and a couple of other parts of the other counties got what they call the pet fund. You all know about the pet funds. And everybody was spending money like it was going out of style. And now we're, taking ourselves by a rope and hanging ourselves trying to, get by. With all the waste and whatever else that's coming into Yucca Mountain still, and I know some people that go up and do some repairs on equipment at Yucca Mountain. They call them, they go up there. They meet them at a certain place. But people are walking around up there in spacesuits almost like, they're all, I mean, I'm not up there, so I'm just telling you what I hear, and they said, we're really, the contract's very lucrative, but they don't offer us a suit to go up there. You know, they're just up there like they would come down to your house and do something and repair something. So I find that a little strange. But, you know, when you go into the what is it, the tunnel? What do you call the tunnel? There's a gentleman that was one of the shift foremans of that big tunnel when they were at the first, I don't know how many hundred feet. And for some reason, there's something that is put in when they put this and that, to hold back the nuclear whatever with the tunnel, or the shell of the tunnel inside. Well, they didn't have any, or it was the wrong kind, or whatever it was, and they were pressured to get this so many feet done. It got done. There's a whole section of that, and I had a second person sort of verify, because he was a worker up there, that yeah, they all talk about it. There's a whole section that doesn't have this extra stuff. Maybe it's like you talking about the conservatism of going overboard to do something. I mean, I don't know if it's absolutely necessary, but you know, that's just some stories that's, you know, one. So here's this thing supposed to be overdone, and maybe it doesn't have everything in it. I don't know. It's just like anything the government has its hands into. It's screwed up, like you said back there. So I say, if there's 49 states against us, okay? We got 49 votes against us. Send it to Nevada. They're out there in the desert. They don't give a damn. So we're bringing the stuff in still with 80, did you say billion or million? 80 million
Tons.
Metric tons, and we got 80 and there's 70, so how are we bringing anything else to there if it's that full?
That's what we've been talking about this whole session.
Okay,
Recycling.
I'm late. I mean, it's just like,
We've addressed all of that.
I mean, it's just so strange. So give us back our pet funds, let us shut the place down. And
We're gonna do better than that.
oh yeah.
Jim, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Just one thing that might put your mind at ease is that the government intends to do this through a public-private corporation run by the private sector and consulted on by the public sector. So the DOE will not be running anything that happens out here.
Right. That's one of the things that we wanted to make sure that the government didn't have its whole hands into this. Right from the beginning. So, do we have any other questions? Okay, Robert, okay, two more. Yeah, real quick.
I'll just stand up and address it myself. Have you ever considered bringing this to the attention of the President of the United States with regards to going to the moon, to using nuclear power, establishing a small modular reactor
Well,
on the...
that's already being,
to be able to take us out to Mars?
it's already being done. We actually tested at Mercury this thing called Krusty, that is the small modular reactor that's gonna power Mars. It's already done. It's already tested. Go ahead.
Stanley, what can we do as citizens here in Nevada to make this go forward? How hard can we do that?
Just talk about this. Education is key. That's what we're trying to do, is turn people around from anti. And it's a win-win-win for everybody. I believe there are gonna be issues we have to address. We're not, delusional to think that we're not gonna have problems. That's why we want the research and development part here, so we can address all of those things. So, but education, turning the people's minds around, getting them off of this anti-nuclear is key. And then vote for politicians that will vote for this. So, go ahead, Mark.
So the gentleman, Dr. Mills,
Tony. Anthony. Yeah.
I just want to get the number right. So if the cash that's in the picture there contain spent fuel, some people call it waste. using the technology that we know how to do, we can take that spent fuel, reprocess it, and turn it into fuel, which is very valuable. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're going out and mining it. They're digging holes in the ground, and they're spending a lot of money to get more fuel. And here we have fuel sitting there in casks that's not being used because we're not recycling it. But if we did recycle it and turn it back into fuel, there would be a remainder left over that would be 10% of 3%. Was that the figure you said? Correct. Okay, that's 3.
Long-lived radionuclide.
Right, long-lived radionuclide. That would be 3 1,000ths. That you would shrink the volume of that stuff we have to store for a long time into something that's 0.3% is that volume. If you look at that picture, I counted those casks. You could basically take that, imagine 10 times the number of those casks all laid out on the landscape. After reprocessing, you would have, in addition to the fuel, you would have only 1 cask left to store for a long period of time.
It's approximately
Okay? I wanted to make sure I understood that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good presentation that you folks put on here. Of course, the devil is always in the detail. To get people talking positive about nuclear energy in Nevada is going to take a monumental task because we've been lied to by the federal government. We've had nuclear weapon grade materials snuck into our state just over the recent years.
Well, it's not. They notified.
It's a trust issue, whether you can trust to be a partner on this issue because they've let us down in the past. And, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on me. So, and the Yucca Mountain, I do not believe the science behind the Yucca Mountain, and I don't think a lot of people do. The state does not believe the science behind Yucca Mountain. We now have earthquake experts from universities coming forward saying, with new technology, we really need to rethink the testing that was done as far as volcanic actions and earthquake actions. There's a lot of things that have to be taking place before you're going to get to the point where you want to be on this. But I don't believe you're going to change the minds of many people that have looked at the science and dispute the science that has come out on Yucca Mountain and don't want to use it as a long-term storage site. However, bringing the material that's already stored in, recycling, I think I could get on board with something like that. I could never get on board storing 80,000 tons of nuclear waste in a volcanic and earthquake zone. It doesn't make sense, it's not practical, and it'll never fly.
We agree with you. We agree with you. So, thank you very much for coming out. I hope it was informative for you. If you have any questions, reach out to us, and thank you for coming.